Hey, welcome to Checkbox Other, the podcast that celebrates people who don't fit in a defined box or category. I'm your host, Nikki Innocent, a humanity activist who believes in the transformative power of story. My guest today is Megan Baker. Megan is a friend of mine that I met through my women's leadership coaching experience. But more importantly, Megan is an entrepreneur, a shaman, and a safe space keeper who, after 26 years as a middle school teacher that impacted over 3,500 students' lives, found her calling to teach in less traditional ways as a women's leadership coach, a shamanic practitioner, a death doula, and in so many other ways. Megan generously shares her challenging and liberating journey into the second stage of her career, and she talks about embracing the legacy she wants to leave behind. If you're interested in or curious about what Megan calls the woo, or spiritual and healing space, this episode is for you. If you're like me, and in a blended family, there's a lot of really great stories that Megan shares here too. And then finally, I mentioned it briefly before, but it's worth a second mention in this intro because it blew my mind. Megan talks about the process of becoming a death doula. We're all human, and we know that death is part of this human experience that we have. And just the idea of having somebody guide you through the really tough and sticky stuff was just really, really interesting. So I hope you stick around to hear a little bit more. And assuming that you like what you hear, please don't hesitate to follow me over on social media as well. I'm on Instagram and on Facebook under my name, Nikki Innocent. Okay, enough of me blabbing. Let's get this party started. Hi, Megan.
Hi, Nikki.
Oh.
I'm so excited to be here with you.
I am so excited to have you and to see your beautiful face and to get to hear your voice that just is like a hug to me. So, I'm just so happy. And thank you so much for being willing to be one of the first in this wonderful journey. I purposely picked you because you do make me feel like home.
Thank you.
I'm going to start crying right up the bat. What is this? No. Okay. So first, I would love to hear from you a little bit about your journey. I know you have done so many amazing things to impact so many people's lives. And I'd love to hear from you kind of what has gotten you to this point right now, where you kind of see yourself going, all that good stuff. Anything about the wonderful world of Megan and the joy that she brings.
Well, thank you. I'm super honored to be here and excited to share more of my story with you. And I'm just really excited for your podcast too. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Feels like the perfect thing for you to be doing. So I'm not going to tell my whole autobiography, but I'm the child of a couple of Midwestern parents. My mom and dad are from Iowa. And right after they got married at age 21 in 1955, they drove their Volkswagen Bug across the country to Southern California to start a new adventure. My dad was in the Navy, had been in Guam in the Philippines, and he called my mom and said, I have 10 days of leave, let's get married. And so that was how they spent their honeymoon, was driving across the country. And they played and enjoyed life for 10 years, which was kind of unusual in those days. And then in the 60s, they started having babies, and I was the first.
Yes.
And then I have a brother who's 2 years younger than me and twin sisters who came right after that. So my parents had 4 kids in 39 months.
Whoa.
Yeah.
It's a busy house.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the Midwestern thing is, I bring it up because there's a lot of really interesting agrarian, really traditional family values that were instilled in us. And the interesting thing is that our mom told us from the time we were little, we were the best friends we would have our whole lives. And for the most part, we like each other, we love each other, and we get along, and we all live fairly close together, which is unusual and really not by choice, but it sort of happened that way. And so pretty family oriented person. And yeah, so I started my life in suburban Los Angeles. And then when I was 10, we moved to Colorado. I think it was the really early 70s. And Rachel Carson had written Silent Spring, and living in Los Angeles, I didn't really know that the sky was blue. And then I moved here and there was snow and nature and this incredible blue sky. And that has informed my life in one piece of it.
The Megan I know is so connected with the outdoors and the outside and the blue sky and all of that it must have been such a wonderful awakening.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Oh,
It
nice.
really was. Well, what else do I want to tell you about my journey? So Went to college, didn't really know what I was going to do, went to grad school, really didn't know what I was going to do, and then went to work here in Fort Collins, which is where I live, at Colorado State University for a program called Upward Bound, which is from Great Society legislation that still exists from the Johnson administration, and developed this real sense of social justice around education and figured out it was my calling. So I was meant to be a teacher. I denied it for a long time. In my mid-20s, I actually became one and spent 26 years doing that, teaching social studies to junior high and high school. I really loved it, and eventually had to make a change because the politics of it drove me crazy. Kids and the creativity of teaching and crafting learning experiences were awesome for me. But just the politics of the leadership of school was kind of crazy. But I had an interesting wandering path to different kinds of schools and different alternatives, and learned a lot and created a lot. And I finally, a few years after leaving it now, have come to terms with my legacy. And I'm just really proud. I mean, I actually could go back, and it's something you can sort of estimate. There are like 3,500 to 4,000 students out there that I personally impacted.
Oh my goodness.
Mostly, I hope, in positive ways.
Oh, I'm sure of it.
Because we all have stories about teachers who are like really crappy to us or said the horrible thing. Even I have them. And, it's really cool to be able to embrace that and to have grown up relationships with some of them and connections with them, and just to think about how important that is in the world, what it really is that an educator does and how they can impact people and families for generations. And when you're in it, you have to just trust and you can't be wedded to the constant reward of it. But it's been really interesting to go through a process of just reflecting on my legacy and the impact I've had.
Yes.
Yeah. The rest
imagine.
Feels like gravy.
Yeah. I mean, how many people in this world are like, Megan Baker shaped me? You talked about the people that you remember that were difficult, right? But the teacher, that one or two teachers, you hear people that have made such amazing things happen. They go back to their formative years and say, that one person believed in me. That one person pushed me outside the box. That one person really had me questioning the world, or made me see that the sky was blue, right? In the same way you were saying that kind of education in your process. There is no question in my mind, because you have asked me questions that have opened a lane that I didn't see before. So yeah. I hope to meet someone one day that says, yeah, Megan was that for me. I mean, because you already were for me a little bit.
Thank you. Thank you. So when I left, I'm a super loyal person. That's one of those Midwestern things. Super devoted to what you do, work hard. And there's some toxicity in all of that. Work really hard, you'll be rewarded. The service piece of that is beautiful. So that was a piece of me wanting to be an educator. Came from a long line of educators, including my mother, who taught kindergarten and first grade. It took me 2 years to separate from that calling in my life. And when I left, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do, but I had these woo practices, spiritual practices, healing work that I do. I was pursuing training in shamanic practice and thought I wanted to go that direction. And an interesting thing happened about 6 months after I left teaching. I'm also a wicked stepmother. And I've been in my young adult stepchildren's lives for 20 years now, since they were 6 and 8, and now they're 26 and 27. And my younger one came to live with us full time. So I have permission to tell this story in case your listeners are wondering. I know I've said this to you before, but he's a young adult adopted from the Philippines by my husband and his ex. He's just turned 26. He is so intersectional. Asian, a member of the LGBTQ community, and also has a profound intellectual disability. And so as I said, I've known him since he was 6, but 4 years ago, his mom asked him to move out of her house, and he came to live with us full time. And he's lived with us and, gone back and forth between houses for the 20 years I've been in part of his life. But that kind of changed my path, because I was writing my business plan to open my healing practice the month that he landed in our house. And I had been a stepmother. So this is one of the other topics that I wanted to talk about. I had been a stepmother for 15, 16 years, which is a very specific role. it's not exactly the same as motherhood, even though I knew I was his parent, one of the profound influences in his life. And I just felt like I'd given birth to a baby, and the
Yeah.
baby was 22. And he was devastated by having to move. And so we were helping him through his grief and moving in with us. And so he became, because my job, I was doing little side jobs and things, and my husband works full time at the local community college. I became the primary support person. So that became a piece of my second stage.
Yeah.
And for a while, I immersed myself in that. But at the same time, I was doing all this women's leadership training. And eventually, about 6 months later, after Leo had moved in with us, Elizabeth McLaughlin asked me to become her community manager and social media person. And I really had no idea why and didn't really know what I was doing, but I said yes. And so that became a part of my world.
Yes. And you are wonderful at it.
Oh, thank you
You
very
are.
much. Thank you very much. It's been really good for a person post 50 to know that they can do all this online stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the beauty in how I've experienced as a member of the communities that you hold and the space that you hold, how authentic you are, how conscious you are of the people in the space with you, and how inclusive you are with asking people to participate, to add their voice, to disagree where they need to disagree, to have conversations. There's something so beautiful. It's something that I think a lot of us have experienced that isn't really happening in the world in many spaces right now. And for people that are coming in, especially in the women's leadership space and the coaching space, a lot of passion, right? And a lot of opinion, and are bringing a lot of experiences, especially if it's a pivot and a career pivot. There's a lot you're bringing with you, and the beauty with which you hold a space that could be really sticky. It really, I mean, there's a lot that could go on there. I think you do such a beautiful job of making sure that everyone's seen and heard and encouraged to share their stories. So I personally, as a member of the community, say thank you so very much for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And it is one thing that Lindsay Para, who is a master of both the corporate world and the magical, mystical world, the Mystic Society world, is a coach for me. And she has helped me to embrace the fact that somehow, I'm not sure exactly how I do it, but people can't see me, but I'm going to put my arms out. I managed to hold a container that is even felt virtually, which is so odd to me. And when she said that to me, it helped me to run a thread through my entire career, from when I was a teenager and being a camp counselor to, then working for Upward Bound and holding those kids who were first generation college, hoping to be first generation college students on a college campus for summers, holding them and helping them see themselves there. And then in my classroom, holding a safe space for all kids to be and learn. And then now doing this in virtual communities, it's helped me to find a through line, at least one through line, of that holding space or creating a container where people can be themselves, get their needs met, feel safe, engage with each other.
Yeah. And that's difficult.
And not have it feel oppressive and too rule bound, but safe.
And distant. Right? Distant. It's so easy to think, I see you two-dimensionally, or I see the words you're putting out there. And so I have the ability to distance myself. I think you do a really good job of not only holding the container, but really inviting people in, because that actually fosters that depth of connection too. So, I mean, you already answered kind of one of my questions that I was going to have around kind of how all of these delightful things that you've been up to and kind of have led you to right now, how they meld together and mesh within one another. But I'd love to hear a little bit about the part where you mentioned kind of going from that concrete job day in and day out of going into a classroom and being a teacher, and people understanding, okay, the first bell rings and the last bell rings. And really, if anybody knows teachers, that last bell doesn't mean they leave. They're still working for much longer. How that shift from that formal version of this is my identity as this particular role, how that shift into both the energy and shamanic space and even the community, that virtual community that does also feel a little bit ambiguous. It's not as concrete. How that happened, how that's shaped your experience right now, what you have found as a wonderful surprise, and parts of that have been a little bit challenging. I'd love to hear a little bit about it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I really had to let go of a lot of my ideas about being a master teacher because I really did, after 25 plus years of doing it, have a mastery over that setting. And also knowing that it's so linear and it's so in a box. The bell rings and certain people march into the room and certain people march out. And it's always different because, especially with teenagers, they come with a new personality each day. But it's predictable. And at the end of the month, there's a paycheck.
Yes.
And so the entrepreneurial journey has been one of really patience with myself in not knowing a lot of things, of forgiveness of myself, or the not knowing how to do it. It's just been such an interesting ride. And I really didn't know, I was trying to set it up when my stepson arrived in our house so that I would be going into a business, a practice, and who knew if it would have been successful. And instead, I ended up working for somebody else, having a number of clients, but Elizabeth and the Gaia Project are the primary one, and then pursuing my own healing practice and juggling the piece of being the support person for this young adult, backing away from the parenting role there. So there's so much going on at the same time. And yeah, it's just been a lot of patience with myself, forgiveness of myself for not knowing what the path looks like down the road, and then being willing to accept that and just trust. If I just keep stepping forward with positive intentions, getting more and more clear about what I want to bring in more of and what I'm willing to say no to, and really learning to say no to things that didn't feel like the right opportunities. And I still haven't learned that fully. I'm
Yeah.
still stretched thin sometimes.
I'm with
But
you there.
yeah, yeah,
Saying no is a very difficult thing. And
yes.
sometimes you feel like you've got your no shoes on, right? You feel like I know exactly how to say no. I feel good in it. And there'll be that one time you say no where you and you feel like you took 6 steps back and you're like, no, I knew how to do that. Now I'm saying yes all over again, or I'm doubting myself. It's a very difficult muscle to build and maintain.
Yeah, yeah. The wonderful thing was, a couple months after Elizabeth asked me to come on board, which was in the fall of, I don't even know what, 3 years ago. Before I felt like I was ready, I had to register myself as an LLC with the state of Colorado. So here I had a business name, and I threw myself a little celebration with my family that I'm sure involved a bottle of champagne. But just remembering along the way to celebrate the little steps that you can overlook like that. And I didn't know what being an LLC meant. And then I was creating invoices to send out to people. How do you do that? I'm going to learn. And, learning all the technological stuff and the social media stuff. Yeah, it's been exciting and interesting. And I've also, as I said, learned to let the pieces of it that I don't like go. And as Elizabeth and I have gotten more clear about role, some of that has been clarified too. What
Good.
exactly do I do?
Yeah.
A lot of different titles.
Yes. So can you talk a little bit about, because I'm hearing that adding to your business toolkit, right, as you're going, it's those very concrete things of learning social media and learning the operations of how to get an LLC and an invoice and all those things that, I have a background in business. And when I started mine and got myself up in an LLC, I was like, I don't know, what do I call myself? Is this invoice right? There are things that even with that background, I felt myself doubting. I'm wondering how the work you were doing in the healing space helped
Mhm.
through that. And if you don't mind, because the healing
Mhm.
aspect of things is something I'm not familiar with. And I will say that you and Lindsay Para's community have definitely opened me up to that being a very real part of this journey, one, as an entrepreneur, and two, just in
Mhm.
life as a human being. So I'd love to hear a little bit about, one, what the healing space is all about, and specifically what you call woo, what makes up that, and how that has paired's a good word, with the business aspects of things that you've
Mhm.
started to grow and learn as well.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is that working with Elizabeth has taken me far afield from where I thought I was going, but giving me all these really interesting skills that have helped support my family as I move more slowly into building my healing practice. So
Mhm.
that's an interesting piece about it. It's that whole day job kind of
Yes.
thing. And really trying to work out with her and with myself, how much energy and time am I willing to give this? My healing practice kind of went on the back burner for a while, but basically, I'll tell you about the shamanic practice and
Mm.
then where I am with it now. My shamanic work, did my training with the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, which is an organization that was started by Michael Harner, who was an anthropologist. He just passed away last year and has been around for about 40 years. And he is parallel with the people who, like Yogananda, brought Hinduism and yoga into the West. And
Okay.
somebody like David Suzuki, maybe, who brought Buddhism to the West.
Okay.
Michael sort of created, through his study, a practice of shamanism that he calls core shamanism.
Okay.
And core means in the Foundation's training that the practices they're not culturally appropriated. So he's not pulling things from these indigenous people and these indigenous people and these indigenous people and then teaching white people how to do them.
Right.
What he did as an anthropologist for decades was to study the core healing practices, the things that many, many groups of people, 80% or more groups of indigenous people on the planet, practice as their shamanic healing or their shamanic divination. And one of the reasons that particular training really appealed to me was because of that. It's not borrowing from any particular culture, but bringing together the philosophical and spiritual bases for these practices, which are tens of thousands of years old. And at the heart of it is the idea of altering your state of consciousness.
Okay.
To enter what is referred to as like a shamanic trance state, which is a light trance. And right now in our culture, plant medicine's really like kind of an underground pop hit,
Yeah.
Ayahuasca, everybody talks about. There are lots of different kinds of plant medicine. The people who practice that in indigenous cultures are highly trained how to do that really well. And Michael was trained first to do that. And he thought, okay, this is how you achieve that altered state of consciousness. But what he discovered as he studied is that many, many cultures use sound, what he called sonic driving. So you can beat a drum at a certain pace and it'll alter your consciousness. And at the same time that studies were being done in the 60s on how different LSD will do that for a person.
Yeah.
There were people at universities studying how sound would do that. And so we know that it's true. It just changes your brainwave patterns and you get entrained and you can take the journey to the realms where your spirit teachers and helpers live and ask questions on behalf of your client and bring back answers or bring back healing for them.
Wow.
And so it's very purposeful work in the way I've been trained. You always do it with intention.
Yeah.
There's a compassion motive. Those compassionate, transcendent spirits want to help, but they can't always reach here. So it's a partnership between the shamanic practitioner and the spirits, and it's amazing work. The other thing about this particular training that I've had is that it's very ethically grounded. You never work for anyone without permission and conscious knowledge. So, for instance, shamanic practitioners and many people, very compassionate, want to do their healing work and say, yesterday there was a disastrous set of tornadoes in Alabama. So there's a lot of healing work to be done there. I would never do that without having a personal connection and the permission of a person who actually wanted that specific healing, because there's just a real understanding that at the core of all of this is personal spiritual authority.
Right.
And that's something even a highly trained healer cannot interfere in the personal spiritual authority of every being.
Right. Yeah, you want the invitation. I mean, it sounds like also in the way that you explained it initially, there's kind of a teamwork aspect to it too. That yes, you are trained to be able to be at this frequency that lay people, I don't even know if that's what's referenced, but that's kind of the other, aren't necessarily able to kind of necessarily get to that frequency, but to welcome you into their space and their experience to help identify where that healing will be the most beneficial.
Right.
I will say that the listeners can't see me. At one point, when you were talking about the sound waves, I feel like my mind just was like, poof.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful and it's so different, at least for me. The learnings that I've had, I didn't even grow up very religious. So the idea of kind of a larger spirit or even a godlike figure was something that, I went to church every once in a while and had this idea of, okay, there's someone watching over us. And I'm all about, I'm open to the idea of these things, but I never had kind of a concrete path for any of it. And then to take kind of the socialized aspect of religion, we'll say, and then take it to a whole nother aspect of like, we all experience our sensory our sensory experience, I guess, lack of a
Mhm.
better word. And the idea that you're saying of like beating a drum, which is such a universal kind of experience. We can understand
Mhm.
that rhythm and that part of it, even honing in on where our heartbeat is. There's something really comforting about
Right.
that idea, right? Of music, even the bass line, that even if you don't really fully understand that you can get to that frequency, that there is so much power in that experience. We feel our bodies move when there's music, right?
Right.
There is a baby that babies sleep really well with that sound of a heartbeat because they've been in the womb with their mother. There's something so
Mhm.
beautiful with just that additional layer that isn't always on the top of our consciousness in, we'll say, in the news media when we talk about things, or in the way we are impacted by a lot of things that happen in this world. And I just, so chills and mind
Yeah.
blown.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting too. Some of the early anthropologists pulled all this knowledge together, and of course, there was gross misunderstandings as anthropologists in the 1800s and early 1900s were doing field work, and, for instance, dismissing the role of women and saying, "Oh, they're always the shaman's assistant," and grossly misunderstanding what the shamans were doing. But one of the ways that one of these early Western anthropologists described it as ecstatic state, and
Mm.
that the shamanic practitioner is like a master of different states of being. One of my teachers always says, "This is practical work. Get in there, get the information, get out, bring it back. It's no good if you're wandering around in there," which, there's a place for that too, to explore your own cosmology and spiritual territory. But yeah, just the ecstatic state was kind of what was coming up for me as you were talking about the music. And in a culture that actually has this as a piece of its understanding from the time babies are born, they're just living in it. There's ceremonies where people enter into those ecstatic states together, and the shaman leads those, and they can be for healing or celebration or whatever. And it's just something that's not really present, that we don't have. But the other thing I wanted to say is that almost anybody can learn to journey.
Really?
Yes.
Ooh, okay.
Yes. Yeah. So that's the other piece of the foundation's work, and why I have so much respect for it, is because the goal isn't for us to train a few people who are the elites who then get to hold that skill and that technology for themselves, but that personal spiritual authority, almost anyone can learn and can then make connections with their own teaching and helping spirits. That's another really interesting piece of it, and appeals to that kind of teacher archetype that lives in me, which is all about helping people learn and then taking that, making myself obsolete, you
Yes.
know?
Well,
So,
obsolete, but
yeah.
there is something beautiful. I mean, so Megan, you and I met in kind of in a coaching program of the same, right? That there is a part of when you step into women's leadership coaching, in some way, shape, or form, both of us were called because it rang true to some aspect of the experience we've had in this world. And there is a part of it where it's you're unpacking your own stuff and you're learning your own stuff. And that's why you got called in one way. And then there's another part of it that if I can hone in and understand, I can amplify. I can shout it from the rooftops. I can bring others who want to learn in, and I can impact other people. And there is something so beautiful about that. And I personally I don't know if you could hear from my reaction. I didn't understand that this is something that's accessible for all. And that's so beautiful. So
Yeah,
thank you for
yeah.
sharing that.
Yeah, it really is. And the interesting thing, you just reminded me, there's another hat I wear,
Yes.
executive coach of all things.
Yes.
It's interesting how much that is related to teaching and the reflective parts of having a spiritual practice of some sort. Coaching people who are working in high powered, highly stressful finance jobs. I bring a lot of all of those things to it. And they're aware that I was a teacher forever, because I want to be transparent about the fact that I am not an expert in their field.
Right.
What I'm an expert at, maybe I'm working toward it,
You are.
is in propelling them forward with some tools. And so just all of those things that I bring are just kind of interesting. And I could not see when I left teaching, or as I moved into all of this, how they came together. And that soup is becoming more apparent to me.
Yes.
How, what a great mix it all is.
Definitely is. And so I feel like I have some hints in my brain, but one of the questions that I like to ask, and why I was so motivated to create this podcast in the first place, is can you share a time or a theme in your life that has been one where you feel quote unquote other? I personally believe that though those experiences can be very isolating and very kind of, I say cold, right? Sometimes it can feel like you're all alone in a room and the light's not on. when we have a chance to understand that emotion, we actually can connect really deeply with another person. We might not have had the same exact experience, but there's something about that feeling that we can connect with. So I'd love to hear one story. If you've got more, I'm open to all, but there's something so beautiful about just even your unique journey to where you are now. Anything that you kind of are feeling called to share here, I would love to hear about.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I knew this question was coming. So I was thinking about it, but it's sort of an arc. I love the idea of a narrative arc. I've sort of hinted at it at where that's kind of come into play in my life. I come from, as I said, those Midwestern people, and I didn't realize when I was especially little how poor we were, but I have had a huge privilege in my life. And so thinking about this question of other has been really interesting for me. And I'm sure it's going to be interesting for all the people that you have on the podcast. But one of the places where that started for me is when we moved to Colorado and I entered a new school. I became a target of relentless bullying that lasted for about 3 years. It had a huge impact on me. I was the new kid and the little kind of chubby or fat girl. And I remember feeling just profoundly alienated from these people, fourth, fifth, and sixth graders. I could not understand what it was that had put the target on me. And as I dealt with that, I remember there was just a crisis point where I sort of had a breakdown when I was about 11 or 12. And it was actually at our family church. I was raised in a Protestant church here, which was actually, it was a place that saved me. Youth group was a place that saved me. But one of the things that became really important to me as a result of being treated so awfully was finding a community. And so youth group kind of saved me. But I remember sort of having a breakdown and an epiphany about in my 11-year-old mind about how I was in charge of how I was going to respond to this. And yeah. And at that point, it was about God and this community and that I would be okay because I had that safety and I had my family, which took good care of me. And I finally told my parents about what was going on. But the interesting thing is that was happening at the end of sixth grade. And whereas most people would say junior high was awful, junior high saved me. I got to go to a new school with more kids, and those kids kind of just left me alone. I was no longer the target. That was an experience that really formed me in terms of how I wanted my students to feel in my classroom, and also cemented in me deep empathy for others and some really important foundational pieces of my social justice perspective on the world. So that's one of the times when I have felt really other, but it gave me some really amazing tools in my life. And also, formed who I am as a person and who I was as a teacher. The other one I think it's really important to mention that I've already talked about is being a stepmother. It's not motherhood. I've never given birth to anyone. And so there's kind of two things going on there for me and for my family. At the most base level, it's that we're a mixed ethnicity family. We have 2 Filipino children who came to us, and they're my kids, and I share them with 2 other adults, and we have this little family unit. But when we walk down the street, people look. And it's not mean, it's curiosity. 99% of the time, it's curiosity. Who are those young people, and why are they with those old white people?
How'd that happen?
What is that mixture? So that's just one thing that we don't really think about it. And then there'll be a look, and you start to go, oh yeah, we look different than other people.
It's a decision between hi, waving and being like, hey, I see you. Welcome. Do you want to talk? Or being like, oh, you're looking at me again. Why are you so curious? Why can't we all just be humans together? I've had a very similar experience. For me, people think at this point in life that I'm dating my parents. So I don't look, my friends that are close to me say sometimes I look like my mom or my dad every once in a while, but both my parents look relatively young, and my father is dark skin, my mom is light skin and blonde hair. We don't look very much alike, and there's this, how'd that happen? Why are they here together? And I'm always like, hi, Dad, or hey, Mom.
Yes.
Just loud enough for if you're looking at me, it kind of clears that up. So yeah, there is something odd about that moment of, I want to welcome your curiosity, or am I protecting us?
Yeah.
from that look and that experience of feeling like you don't belong. And as a stepmother, as a person that's kind of again, you as a wonderful holder of safe space, I'm sure it's such a difficult experience to personally process. And then also thinking of your two kids, how they're viewing the world and feeling that, whether they are very aware or sometimes you can just feel it in the vibes around you. So yeah, I think that's a beautiful experience to share. Ooh.
Yeah, and one of the things I learned as a teacher, even here, I've taught in different settings in different parts of the country, is that there's no family that looks like the mythical family.
Right.
So many adoptions and two moms and two dads and just all kinds of different makeups of family that have brought in extras and grandparents raising kids, and everybody comes from different branches of the tree. And I've sat through hundreds of parent teacher conferences and met all different kinds of families. And so mine isn't that outlandish, but it still is. Just looking at us on the outside, it's a different kind of collection of people than people would normally see in our little city. So it's very interesting to me, the dichotomy between what people recognize and what the lived experiences of real people are.
Yeah. It reminds me of, I don't know if you remember this, but Cheerios, this is like a couple of years ago, had this big, huge deal. Again, my consciousness was very aware because it was a biracial family.
Right.
But they had a commercial of a little kid wanting a bowl of cereal, and I think it was his father was black and his mother was white. And there was outrage of showing a family looking different. And that was 2016, 2017. It's not 1975 when loving, or 75 in the 70s, we'll say, when loving was a big thing, right? And so it's this idea of what we see on the screen or we see on magazines and in the media, how that feels more real life family than the families we see around us or the families that are coming into your parent teacher conference. It's really interesting how our view, though we're actually seeing these things in front of us, becomes so fixed on that archetype, that I don't remember what the exact word you used was, but like that kind of ideal family that we've been brought up to think, the kind of, I don't know why Norman Rockwell's coming to me, but images of what American families look like and the reality of what American families look like.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's beautiful.
Exactly. The other layer of that for me, in kind of the other sense, is that archetype of maiden, mother, crone. So I never quite fit it in the center, I was divorcing around the time maybe I should have had babies because I was married to an alcoholic, a man I loved deeply, but who was not going to get well. And it was a dangerous situation for me. And so at that moment that was happening, the support I needed was crone energy. And all of a sudden I had pulled into my life this beautiful group of women who were older than me, who welcomed me in and supported me in doing that. But there was grief in my process of, okay, I don't think I'm going to give birth. And then I connected with this man who had been divorced and had these two kids and moved into kind of the step parenting role. And now I'm 55 and I am, I'm moving into the crone stage. I'm there. I'm fully there. I should just embrace that. And looking back on this 3 aspects of what it means to be a woman in Western culture and thinking, wow, I did that differently. And again, so many women around us are doing this differently. The image of what we're supposed to be versus the other that we are.
Right.
And the beautiful ways that can unfold when you're just willing to go for it and you have the safe space to build that other thing can just be amazing and so fulfilling.
Do you mind taking just a moment? You mentioned the 3 aspects of what make you a woman. What would those 3 buckets be that I already am kind of finding myself rolling my eyes about internally a little bit, that there are boxes we need to check in order to equate to being a woman?
Yeah, it's kind of the aspects of the, I guess, Western civilization's goddess mythology. You spend your time as the maiden growing into a woman. Then the next aspect of it is all about becoming someone's wife and then giving birth to their children. And then the last part is that elderhood, which I think it's from 70s feminist movement of women really trying to define themselves and give themselves a space within the culture. And even that created a set of boxes that only, some of us could fit into. And still there's all that misogyny and ageism now
Yeah.
that doesn't respect what that juicy crone energy can be. So anyway, it's an interesting kind of framework, and then we got to bust it down.
I was going to
Doesn't
say,
it?
all right, thank you. Thank you for showing
Yeah,
me what I need to knock over. Thank you very much.
exactly.
That's why I feel like it's worth calling it out to say, okay, hold on. One of those three things, that middle pocket, the way that
Mhm.
it was explained was about the other person. It
Yeah.
was to marry someone else and to bear someone else's children, even in the way that
Yes.
that purpose
Yes.
was there. It wasn't to find somebody to be your partner and to
Right.
birth your children. It was
Yeah.
kind of this feeling of we're put on this earth to be this vehicle and this vessel. And what? That's not how
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel. How about everybody else?
Yeah. The
Yeah.
commodification.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
And to say
So
that
interesting.
doesn't take away from the beauty of finding a partner. And it doesn't take away from the beauty of bringing lives into this world one way or another, or parenting. However you
Hmm.
bring a life into this world, or you are a parent in this world, it doesn't take the beauty away from that. It just brings the ownership of the experience back to the individual rather than
Right.
outsourcing the wonderful part of the experience and owning the responsibility in your body. Such an
Right.
interesting thing.
Yeah.
Well, I want to give one hot minute if you want to talk really quickly about kind of what's next. I know you mentioned a couple really cool things you're doing. I want to hear a little bit about that because I am jazzed up about it. And I think we might
Yeah.
have to do episode number 2 or our
Yes.
conversation to dive into it.
I am so this is my year. The word I chose for the year, I know everybody chooses a word, but this is kind of a first for me, is visibility, because one of the things that comes out of that Midwestern upbringing is great humility, but also sort of, if you're trying to be an entrepreneur and grow your business, sort of toxic. Had to unlearn it, working through it. But yeah, making visible my shamanic work and my healing practice and my divination work. And also, I've just recently been trained as a death doula. So I'm now working with the organization in Boulder, Colorado, that is called Conscious Dying Institute. And I'm TAing a class they're putting together for conscious dying educators. And that's what I'm really jazzed about, is to explode our lack of communication around what's going to happen to every single one of us.
Yeah.
The
So
process
do
of
you mean
dying and death.
when you're saying being a death doula, what does that look like?
A death doula is a person who is an advocate for the dying person and their wishes in the process. And that can be anything from helping them plan how they want the process to go, to gathering resources, to actually being at the bedside and helping them have the things and the people and the rituals there that they want, and seeing them through
Mhm.
the process of leaving the spirit, leaving the body. So
Wow.
it's amazing work.
Yeah, as you've seen in my life recently, I lost a close friend of mine, and there is something, at a relatively young age, death entered my life in very odd ways. I lost some close friends in high school. There was sickness and illness happened, but recently, being in my mid 30s and losing a close friend and having it be something that was oddly like, I've done this before. I've lost someone to cancer and I've lost someone young. There's something weird about the fact that, one, we never really talked about it. And two, I felt like I was supposed to just know how to do it,
Yeah.
which is such an odd combination of things. And I wasn't the person that was transitioning out of this world. I wasn't a member of the family, right? And it was one of those
Right.
things that I wish so much more of us were able to talk about, even just talk about the idea of passing and how we honor the soul that's no longer in the body, right? And just making it something that's not this unspoken scary space, and bringing the love and honoring the beauty of the life that was lived in that body on this earth. So I very much, when you wrote that, I was like, oh, Megan, there you are doing things that I didn't know I needed. Hi. So it's beautiful that you do that. I mean, again, my body's all hot and it's a combination of heat and chills here, but thank you. And again, you going from learning that stuff to becoming the teacher and wanting to spread this gospel to the world is just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. I'm excited about it. So
yeah. Well, we'll follow up again so you can tell us all about it. Oh,
okay.
thank you, Megan. I really appreciate you taking the time
Thank
to be a part
you.
of it. Oh,
Thank
all right. Talk to you
you.
soon.
Take care. Love
Bye.
you.
Love you right
Bye-bye.
back. You made it. Thanks for sticking with us all the way through to the end. I hope that means you liked it. If you haven't yet, please be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you can get alerts when our new episodes drop. Also, if you have a minute, I'd really appreciate if you could head over and rate and review this podcast on iTunes or whatever platform you use to listen to us. And then finally, if you're interested in hearing from me in between episodes or getting some more inside scoop of what's going on when an episode might drop, I encourage you to follow me over on social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook under my name, Nikki Innocent. I hope to see you there, and I would love for you to be part of the community. See you next time.